Welcome back to the new of this family. Today's video is more than just a story. It's a reflection of the struggles, resilience, and strength of our community. Every view, every like, and every share helps amplify the voices that history has tried to silence. Together, we're not just watching, we're standing up against racism and injustice. Thank you for being here and for being part of this movement. Let's dive in. Asterisk, the arrest outside the bakery. It was just after 9 in the morning when the dispatch call crackled through the radio. Blackmail in progress. Mid-30s male, navy jacket, possible vehicle break-in on Madison Avenue. Officers Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer, sipping their lukewarm coffee, were already patrolling that stretch of road in their marked cruiser. Their shift had been quiet until then. A few parking complaints, a minor fender bender, and now an urgent report demanded their attention. Lynn glanced at Brent over the dashboard. Navy jacket, Madison Avenue, she muttered, raising an eyebrow. Sounds promising. Or just another guy fitting a description, Brent replied, smirking, as he navigated the cruiser past a row of early morning joggers. But hey, let's check it out. They rounded the corner and pulled alongside Grange Bakehouse, one of downtown Boise's busiest cafes. Outside, morning commuters clustered around wrought iron tables, inhaling the first light of day. In his mid-30s, stood at the edge of the sidewalk, his back to the street, casually flipping through his phone. A half-eaten croissant peeped from a paper bag in his left hand. He wore a neat navy jacket that matched the dispatch description just enough. Brent parked abruptly, tires grinding against the asphalt. No lights, no sirens, just a screech of rubber. Lynn was out the door before the cruiser came to a full stop, her service pistol holstered but hand ready at her side. Heads up, hands where I can see them, she called, voice loud enough to draw cafe patrons' attention. The man Kenton Morrow snapped his head around, surprise flickering across his calm features. His posture tightened, but his expression remained composed, betraying neither fear nor hostility. Brent emerged, stride purposeful. Sir, he said, leveling his voice, you fit the description of a suspect in a vehicle break-in. Don't move. Kenton glanced at the bakehouse behind him, then back at the officers. I'm just waiting for my driver, he said smoothly. I didn't. Lynn cut him off with a roll of her eyes. We'll sort it out at the station, she declared. Step over here. Before he could respond, Brent grabbed Kenton's arm and yanked him around. You resisting arrest now? Brent snarled, cocking his head toward approaching bystanders. Lynn barked, turn around. The snap of cuffs closed around Kenton's wrists with a muted click. He neither struggled nor spoke. He simply angled his head downward, letting the cold metal settle against his skin. A small crowd had gathered. Phones emerged, recording the spectacle. Brent exchanged a glance with Lynn and chuckled. Funny how they all get mouthy until they see the cuffs, Lynn said. The smirk in her voice unmistakable. Probably another guy with a fake LinkedIn page, Brent added, leaning in. Some story about credentials. They never read him his rights. No Miranda warning cut through the morning air. They never asked for identification. They never opened the croissant bag or inspected the receipt poking out of its top. Kenner eyes. Kenton was guilty the moment he matched the jacket. Brent clapped a hand on Kenton's shoulder and propelled him toward the rear passenger door of the cruiser. "Let's go," he said. Lynn followed, bolting the door behind him and sliding into the driver's seat with a grin. Brent dropped into the passenger side, muttering about the paperwork they'd get to later. Inside the cruiser, the mood was light to light. Brent leaned back, juggling a folder as if it were a trophy. "Got anything to say for yourself?" he asked, half turning, half smiling. Kenton sat silent, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the back of the front seats. After a beat, he finally, coupe, spoke. "I want my phone call." Brent's face soured. After booking, he shot back, reaching for the radio mic. Lynn started the engine. "Let's get this over with," she said, pulling away from the curb without checking mirrors. The cruiser accelerated, the city's bustle receding behind them. They arrived at the precinct 2 blocks later. Kenton was escorted inside without ceremony, cuffs still gleaming in the hallway lights. A clerk at the booking desk, a fellow named Rob Tesh, looked up in surprise. "Ah, you guys sure about this? Ha, brow, FURROWING. Brent waved a dismissive hand. "Fits the call. Let's move." A couve. Lynn leaned in to recuff the final link. "We'll clear it up back here," she said. Rob eyed Kenton. Shouldn't we at least verify his ID?" he ventured. Brent laughed, rolling his eyes. "Nope," he said. "Let's just file it." Lynn shrugged and led Kenton past rows of holding cells. Inside, Kenton perched on a metal bench. His jacket was removed, revealing a crisp dress shirt and tailored slacks. Even in handcuffs, he looked composed and hurried, almost deliberate. Tesh hovered nearby, clipboard in hand, but said nothing as Lynn processed the paperwork. Brent thumbed through Kenton's folded lapels. Still nothing. He asked Kenton, met his gaze. "When will I get that phone call?" He repeated evenly. Brent glanced at Lynn, who shook her head. After booking, she confirmed. Moments later, Kenton was led to a small interview room. He sat back straight, waiting. The room was stark. A metal table, 2 chairs, and a phone mounted on the wall. Lynn unlocked the door. "Here," she said, unlocking his hands and handing him the handset. "One call." Kenton lifted it without haste. He pressed a single button. "Sis Morrow," he announced into the receiver. "Boise PD, Madison Avenue, incident need complete dispatch logs and case reports by 1600 hours today." He set the handset down and stood. "You?" No strain in his voice. No hesitation. Lynn and Brent watched jaws slack as he strode from the room. In the corridor, Rob Tesh peeked from the booking desk, eyes wide. Brent caught his gaze and smirked. "Fits the call," he mumbled again, irritation lacing his tone. Lynn rolled her eyes. "Some people think they're above the rules," she muttered. They returned to the squad room, unperturbed. Brent cracked open another can of soda. Lynn was back on her coffee. They swapped grins. Oblivious to the ripple, their actions had already set in motion an echo beyond cuffs and accusations. One that would reach far past the doors of Grange Bakehouse and reverberate through the precinct long after Kenton Morrow walked free. Booking and the first call, the precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. As Kenton Morrow was guided through its sterile hallways, his hands remained cuffed at his sides. The cold steel, a steady reminder of the morning's abrupt turn. Officer Rob Tesh, perched behind the filing desk, watched Kenton's calm silhouette pass under the glare. When Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer dumped Kenton at the booking counter, Rob's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "You sure about this?" Rob asked, lowering his clipboard. Brent waved him off, irritation in his tone. "Fits the call. Navy. Jacket. Madison Avenue," he said, as if chanting evidence. "We'll sort it here." Lynn leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, already unconcerned. Kenton offered no resistance. He simply stood, head level, shoulders squared. His dress shirt peeked from beneath the uniform fleece the officers had forced on him. The collar, crisp and unwrinkled, cues. His posture spoke of order and control. Name. Rob prompted Kenton L. Morrow. Kenton replied, voice quiet and measured. Each syllable landed precisely, as though read from prepared notes. Rob jotted the name, glancing at the screen twice before flicking his eyes back to Kenton. Brent scoffed. "Let's see your ID then," he said, presenting the radio microphone in Kenton's direction. "Or we'll assume it's fake." Kent inclined his head. "I don't carry my wallet when I run errands," he stated. "My driver's picking me up." Lynn rolled her eyes. "Sure," she muttered, flatly. "We'll verify it back at the station." She snapped her fingers at Brent. "Hurry up." Rob hesitated. "Isn't it procedure to at least check his wallet tour body cam footage?" he asked, eyebrow raised. Brent glared. "This procedure doesn't apply before we book him. Now move." He shoved Kenton forward. Lynn pressed the cuffs tighter, ignoring Kenton's muted wince. At the processing window, Rob slid a fingerprint scanner forward. Kenton leaned in, palms pressed to the glass plate. The machine beeped, and Rob watched the data appear on screen. "Scanned," he reported. "What about the phone call?" Kenton asked, surprising them both. His voice held no tension, only quiet insistence. Brent scoffed. After booking, he said again, and crossed his arms. Kenton glanced at Rob. "Will I get that call?" he inquired softly. Rob cleared his throat. "Under policy, you're entitled to one." Lynn snapped her gum. "We'll decide when," she snapped. Brent nodded, eyeing his partner. "Let's finish this." Rob stepped aside, and Kenton was led toward a small room at the end of a narrow corridor. The room's white walls were bare, save for a single telephone bolted to the metal desk. A sign above read, "Authorized calls only." The door clicked shut behind him. Inside, Kenton removed one cuff, shrugged out of the fleece, and draped it over the chair. The polished black of his jacket hung neatly, its shoulders uncreased. Up the phone receiver and checked for a dial tone. The offices outside remained oblivious to the calm choreography unfolding. Moments later, Lynn's shadow crossed the frosted glass window of the door. She peered in, sighing. "Fine," she muttered, fishing keys from her pocket. "You get your call." She unlocked the remaining cuff and handed Kenton the receiver. For the first time, his gaze softened slightly as he lifted the handset. He pressed a single button. "This is Morrow," he said into the receiver. "Boise PD, Madison Avenue incident. Dispatch logs and case materials delivered to my office by 1600 hours today." He paused, then added, "Thank you." He replaced the handset and secured the cuff with a click. Outside, Brent tussled with the paperwork on his clipboard. Lynn scrolled her phone, brow furrowed. Rob watched the booking room door, sensing the shift in power. Kenton emerged, calm. As ever, his jacket slung over one shoulder, the other arm free. Brent's jaw tightened. "Everything goes smoothly?" he demanded. Kenton met his gaze, eyes steady. "Very," he said, voice devoid of malice. He slipped past them, heading straight for the precinct chief's outer office. "Hey," Brent called, but Kenton didn't break stride. Lynn shot Brent a sharp look, but neither officer made a move to stop him. In the chief's office, Kenton produced his federal credentials, embossed ID-bearing seals and signatures, slid them across the desk without a word. The chief, a tall man with graying sideburns, titrated between surprise and realization. He read the credentials, then looked up, eyebrows raised. "Special Counsel for Civil Accountability," he read aloud. "You've got jurisdiction here." "Aha!" He leaned back, adjusting his glasses. Kenton folded his hands. "Under the State Law Enforcement Integrity Act." "Yes," he replied. "You'll receive an email confirming the audit request by this afternoon." The chief's fingers hovered over his keyboard. "Audit request," T repeated. "For what?" "Procedural detainment without ID verification," Kenton stated simply. "Unjustified use of force allegations may follow." The chief nodded slowly. "I'll initiate the release," he said. "Expect the email shortly." Back in the hallway, Rob Tesh met Kenton at the door. I'm sorry about those officers," he admitted. "I don't think they followed protocol." "They can explain themselves to the review board," Kenton replied, voice calm but firm. "I trust the process." Kenton walked out of the precinct hands-free, shoulders squared. Brent and Lynn watched from the booking desk. Disbelief and anger rippled across their faces. Across the corridor, Rob returned to his station. Eyes on the unoccupied chair Kenton had just vacated. In the squad room, the phone rang. The chief's direct line. Brent answered. "Okay." A moment later, his face drained of color. He hung up and looked at Lynn, voice tight. "He's being released and audited." Lynn blinked. "What?" Brent clenched his jaw. "He's special counsel. He called in a review under Article 14. We're off the case." Silence fell over the room. The laughter and banter that had accompanied the morning evaporated. Officers paused mid-typing, coffee cups halted halfway to lips. The specter of oversight, once abstract, now loomed tangible and immediate. Kenton Morrow, once merely a suspect cuffed outside a bakery, had flipped their world with a single phone call. And in the charged quiet that ensued, Brent and Lynn realized they were no longer in control of the narrative. Their shift, which had started with casual arrogance, now bristled with uncertainty by the time the afternoon sun filtered through the precinct windows. The call logs one's routine records had become exhibits of power. Kenton's staccato request echoed in every corner, a reminder that authority could shift. At any moment, with nothing more than unwavering resolve and a direct line to oversight, and as the officers prepared for the fallout, they understood that Chapter 2 of their day would be defined not by their own choices, but by the quiet force of a man who refused to be silenced. The Audit alert by mid-morning. Word of Kenton Morrow's swift release had rippled through the precinct like a shockwave. The squad room, once filled with the low hum of radios, now throbbed with murmured speculation. Officers who'd paused over paperwork flicked their heads toward the front desk. Lynn Mercer closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, arms folded, staring at the blank wall as if it held answers. Brent Halcroft stood by the coffee machine, coffee cup forgotten in his hand, eyes fixed on the precinct's main entrance, as if expecting Kenton himself to stride back in. 30 minutes after Kenton's departure, the precinct chief's email arrived. To Precious PD Command Subject, Civil Oversight, Audit Request, M. Morrow Detainment. Brent checked the sender address twice before opening it. The body of the message was terse and authoritative. An immediate release. Requests backed by credentials and a mandate to audit the detainment under Article 14 of the State Law Enforcement Integrity Act. Attached were digital copies of Kenton's Special Counsel ID, a link to his federal profile, and a notice that the audit must commence within 48 hours. Brent's lip curled downward as he read. He cleared his throat and glanced over at Lynn. Article 14 Audit, he announced. Voice tight. Civil accountabilities on this now. The words turned the squad room into something unrecognizable, a hive alive with tension and uncertainty. Immediately, two sergeants huddled beside the printer, heads bent over printed copies. Rookie. Officers exchanged wary looks, their conversations stuttering into silence. Whenever a veteran glared in their direction, Lynn's jaw worked as she absorbed the notice. She began, but Brent cut her off. He pulled strings, he said under his breath. This must be some watchdog group influence. His tone was conspiratorial, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He reached for his coffee, realizing too late it had gone cold. He set it aside and walked toward the break room, dragging Lynn in behind him. Inside the break room, the fluorescent lights seemed harsher. A half-empty vending machine hummed in the corner. Brent set his coffee cup on the counter. Kids on. The street, he muttered. Just another guy with connections. Lynn leaned against the counter, arms still crossed. City Hall mix-up, she said, voice flat. Won't stick in the long run. But her eyes darted toward the door, as though expecting anyone to reassure her that the audit was just a bureaucratic hiccup. From the hallway, soft knock sounded on the break room door. Officer Rob Tesh poked his head inside, clipboard in hand. "Captain's orders," he announced. "He wants Halcroft and Mercer in his office, now full uniforms. Formal statement." His voice was steady, but his thumbs twitched over his clipboard as though it were a lifeline. Brent stiffened. "Now?" he asked. Tesh nodded, silently pushing the door open wider. Lynn exchanged a look with Brent and straightened her jacket, the earlier bravado slipping away as they trudged down the corridor toward the captain's office. The precinct felt unfamiliar and hostile. The polished linoleum gleamed, but beneath it lay a current of distrust. Officers passed in silence, avoiding eye contact. In the captain's office, the door stood ajar. Captain Rolstead, flanked by two suited figures neither officer recognized, beckoned them in. His posture was rigid. His customary easy smile was gone, replaced by a thin line of disapproval. Officers Halcroft and Mercer. The captain began, voice clipped. "This is Mr. Granger and Miss Asai from the State Civil Accountability Office." The two figures sat opposite them, one holding a leather folio, the other with a neutral expression that bordered on ominous. Brent and Lynn assumed seats directly across from the captain's desk, the distance underscoring the gulf now separating them from the precinct they'd called home. Mr. Granger spoke first. "An internal review has been authorized regarding your conduct during the detainment of Mr. Morrow on Madison Avenue." His tone was neutral but firm, each word measured. Miss Asai slid a thick folder across the desk toward Brent. "We will examine your call logs, reports filed, body cam footage, and any civilian complaints related to discretionary stops over the past 5 years." She paused. "We expect full cooperation." Lynn swallowed, her throat dry. Brent's fingers drummed the edge of the folder. The captain cleared his throat. "You'll receive subpoenas for the formal review hearing," he said. "It's set for 2 weeks from today. Until then, you're relieved of field duty." The words landed like a gavel strike. Relief of field duty, an official acknowledgement that their badge no longer guaranteed authority or immunity. The gravity of their situation crystallized. This was far more than an audit of one incident. It was a probe of their entire on-duty history. They left the office in numb silence. The corridor stretched out like an endless gauntlet. Officers in the bullpen stared at them, some with pity, some with scorn. Brent's mouth felt dry as he returned to the squad room. Lynn trailed behind, shoulders stooped for the first time. The bulk of the day's work, the reports, the arrests, the routine stops, felt meaningless now, eclipsed by the prospect of every decision they'd ever made being scrutinized. Back at their desks, Brent and Lynn packed their personal items into their lockers. Lynn removed family photos and tucked them gently into her jacket pocket. Brent stared at his wedding ring, turning it slowly. Neither spoke. The precinct's tone had shifted irrevocably. Even the radios on the desks crackled with new suspicion. conversations resumed in hushed whispers. Screens were minimized at the sight of the two suspended officers, and the hum of printers was the only accompaniment to the unspoken question, who would be the next under review? By evening, the state's Civil Accountability Office's notice had spawned rumors that stretched beyond the walls of the station. Over drinks at Twin Falls Tavern, Brent's Kazuna, fellow officer offered sympathetic updates. "Your captains. Sweating bullets," he confided. "They're combing through every old report. Best of luck, brother." Lynn, nursing a beer on her porch at home, texted friends about City Hall politics, but deleted the messages moments later. The facade of defiance was struggling to hold. As night crept over Boise, the precinct grew quieter. The penalty box of surveillance cameras blinked in the corners, silent witnesses to every move. In cells that once held suspects like Kenton Morrow, only empty bunks remained. The weight of accountability pressed down, reminding every officer that every stop, every cuff, every decision could be questioned. And in the hush of their suspended duty, Brent and Lynn Mercer faced the stark reality that their careers and their reputations hung in the balance of an unrelenting audit. The procedural review, Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer arrived at downtown Boise's concrete courthouse just before 10 o'clock. The gray facade and glass doors were unremarkable, no marble columns, no imposing steps, yet the atmosphere crackled with tension. Brent adjusted his pressed uniform shirt and motored gaze over the plaza, where a handful of journalists clustered, cameras slung over their shoulders. Lynn checked her reflection in a tinted window before following him inside. Through the security checkpoint, they showed badges and metal trays, then stepped into corridor to see, aside from the hush of footsteps and distant muffled voices, the courthouse felt sterile and controlled. They exchanged a quick nod. This was routine, they told themselves. They'd testified in procedural reviews before, defended their decisions countless times. Today would be no different. Courtroom to see, however, was unlike the small, half-empty rooms they expected. Rows of seats were nearly full. Court reporters tapped away at steno machines. 2 camera crews, one from local TV, another from a statewide news service, lined the back wall. A city council liaison sat near the front, stylus ready. Every seat, every lens, every clipboard bore witness to their arrival. The bailiff called their names. "Officers Halcroft and Mercer, please approach the front bench." Brent swallowed and led the way, Lynn at his side. They passed a man in a dark suit, seated beside the judge's bench. He flipped through a thick binder, glancing neither at them nor the crowd. A gold nameplate before him read, "Special Counsel, Civil Accountability Office, Kenton M. Morrow." Brent's heart faltered. Mercer caught his elbow. Before either could process, the judge rapped her gavel. Court is now in session. Today's hearing concerns a procedural review of officers' conduct during the detainment of Mr. Morrow on Madison Avenue. Her tone was measured but insistent. "Mr. Morrow will serve in an advisory capacity to this review." Lynn's jaw tightened. Brent opened his mouth, but the judge continued. Officers Halcroft and Mercer, state your positions for the record. Your Honor, Brent began, voice steady, though his mind raced. I'm Officer Brent Halcroft, and I'm Officer Lynn Mercer. Lynn added curtly. Proceed, the judge said. Brent squared his shoulders. On Thursday, at approximately 9 a.m., we received a dispatch describing a male in a navy jacket suspected of a vehicle break-in. We located the individual Mr. Morrow outside Grange Bakehouse. He matched the description, failed to comply with verbal commands, and we effectuated a detainment for investigation. He glanced at Mercer. I read him the necessary commands. Lynn stepped forward. He refused to show identification, and we observed non-compliance. We arrested him for resisting. Her voice was clipped. Her eyes flicked to Kenton, then away. Morrow made a single click with his pen. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Morrow, would you like to respond? Kenton set aside his binder and stood, buttoning his dark suit jacket. His presence filled the modest courtroom, calm, deliberate, authoritative. Your Honor, he began. Voice clear, I appreciate the officer's willingness to explain their actions. However, this review must consider patterns, not isolated steps. He paused, eyes sweeping the room. We have authorization to examine conduct, not merely recount events. Brent's throat tightened. The judge nodded. You may continue. Laid his binder on the advisory table. I have reviewed preliminary materials. The dispatch description was vague, male, navy jacket, mid-30s. No distinguishing features. No corroborating evidence. Yet the officers acted swiftly, bypassing ID checks, body cam verification, and de-escalation protocols. That warrants scrutiny. He met their gaze. I move to suspend direct testimony pending authorization for a full internal affairs review. A whisper rippled through the spectators. The judge consulted her notes, then tapped her gavel. Motion granted. Direct testimony is suspended. Internal affairs may proceed with an investigative hearing. The officers will remain present as observers. Brent exhaled, jaw slack. Mercer's face whitened. Their planned defense evaporated. The judge continued, Officers, you may step down. This hearing will resume once the internal review report is complete. She banged the gavel. A hush fell over the chamber. They retreated to the spectators' seats, hearts pounding. Round them, murmurs fluttered judgment they could not hear but felt in every stare. Journalists adjusted cameras. The city council liaison tapped notes. Brent sat, hands gripping the wooden armrests. Mercer perched beside him, knees bouncing, gaze fixed on the floor. The minutes stretched, each one taut with anticipation. Finally, the judge called the officers back to the front. Internal Affairs has authorized a formal review. Officers, please approach. They obeyed. The judge turned to Morrow. Special Counsel Morrow, you may present your findings to this panel. Again, Kenton stood. He opened his binder, extracting a neatly printed map. Geospatial. Analysis of discretionary stops by these officers over the past 5 years. Notice the concentration in specific neighborhoods disproportionately affecting minority demographics. He handed the map to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge examined it, eyebrows knitting. Above the map, hundreds of red pins formed tight clusters. Beneath it, statistics, 42% more stops than comparable units, 90% ending without charges. He continued without pause. Exhibit B, Audit of body cam footage uploads. Of 10 stops logged, 4 had missing or corrupted video files in violation of departmental policy. He clicked a pen. I have witness statements from Julian York and Ellen Rivers, victims of questionable stops, who describe excessive force and humiliating procedures. He looked at Brent. Officers, do you acknowledge these patterns? Lynn swallowed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Brent's mouth tightened in a thin line. The judge leaned forward. Officer Halcroft. Brent steadied his voice. Follow the training and protocols we're given. Each call is unique, but you also control how you execute the call. Morrow interrupted gently. You control whether to verify identity, whether to de-escalate, whether to rely on assumptions. He folded his hands. This review is not about intent. It's about impact. Silence fell so deep they could hear their own breathing. The judge gazed at Brent and Lynn in turn, then back at Morrow. This panel will reconvene in 2 weeks to hear any further testimony. Until then, this case remains open for departmental and civilian review. He closed his binder. Thank you, Your Honor. Without another word, Kenton sat, calm as a stone. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered into handheld mics. The city council liaison tapped notes furiously. Brent and Mercer marched out, stunned. The courtroom door closed behind them with a definitive thud. In the hallway, they stood shoulder to shoulder, breathing in unison. Words failed them. Lynn finally exhaled. We didn't even get to defend ourselves. Her voice broke. Brent shook his head. He stopped it before it began. His gaze drifted to the courtroom window where Kenton's silhouette was framed by morning light. He was not the accused. He was the authority now. They walked away in silence, the echo of the gavel still reverberating in their ears. Outside, the city moved on. Commuters strode past, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding behind courthouse doors. Inside them, though, a new chapter had begun, one where accountability eclipsed assumption, and patterns once hidden in plain sight demanded their day in court. The procedural review had begun, and Kenton Morrow had already won the first move. Exposing the pattern, 2 days later, on a drab Monday morning, Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer reported to a neutral municipal building on Fairview Avenue. The space once used for zoning meetings and forgotten civic committees was transformed. For their review hearing, folding chairs circled a long, gray conference table under harsh fluorescent lights. Legal observers, ethics board members, and 2 representatives from the state attorney's office filled most seats. Captain Rolstad stood at the back. Silent guard. Brent and Lynn took their places opposite Special Counsel Kenton Morrow, who sat poised at the table's head. Mrs. Asai from Civil Accountability opened the session. Her voice was flat but firm. This formal review addresses alleged abuse of discretionary authority and misapplication of procedural stops. Kenton nodded and tapped his binder. Officers Halcroft and Mercer, thank you for appearing. He glanced at the panel. This won't be about isolated incidents, but about demonstrating patterns that have caused harm. He opened the binder to a set of documents. Exhibit 1, he said, sliding forward a printed spreadsheet. Stops. Initiated by these officers. From January 2020 through December 2024, he pointed to a column labeled Reason, Matching Description, Suspicious Behavior, Non-Compliance. The next column, How Come, listed no charges in 82% of cases. Lynn shifted in her chair. We respond to calls. If someone fits the description, we detain for investigation. Kenton met her gaze. But 82% with no charges suggests a flaw in that approach. He flicked to a heat map of Boise neighborhoods, dotted with red pins. Exhibit 2, Geographic Distribution of Stops. Notice clusters in East Side and Central Districts areas with higher populations of color. A murmur rippled. Through the panel, Sergeant Diaz leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Brent opened his mouth. We're not targeting demographics? Then why does the data reveal a 42% higher stop rate in those neighborhoods compared to other patrol teams? Kenton interjected gently. You control where to drive, when to approach, and how to interpret a vague description. Mrs. Asai turned a page. Exhibit 3, Body Cam Audit. Of the 120 stops logged, 15 videos are missing or labeled corrupted. She tapped the folder. Policy requires all footage to be uploaded within 24 hours. Brent's fingers twitched. Some could be technical errors or deliberate omissions, Kenton suggested. Voice even. He laid out timeline sheets showing repeated camera malfunction entries by the same officers. Each malfunction coincided with stops ending in no charges. Next came civilian testimonies. The first witness, Julian York, testified via video link. He recounted being pulled over for a broken taillight, then slammed against his car and detained for asking for a supervisor. His wrist was bruised for weeks afterward. His voice was calm but sorrowful as he described the indignity. Brent's knuckles whitened around his pen. He glanced at Lynn. Mercer's lips pressed together, eyes fixed on the screen. The room fell silent when Ellen Rivers stepped to the podium. She spoke of carrying groceries home when officers surrounded her, barking orders. Her daughter watched in tears as she was thrown to the ground. I told them I wasn't the suspect, she said, voice trembling. But they marched me to the cruiser anyway. Lynn's chin quivered. She looked at Brent, who stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Kenton rose, letting the gravity settle. These aren't isolated complaints. They reflect a broader failure in discretion and de-escalation. He addressed the panel. I have cross-referenced officer reports with civilian records and demographic data. The result is clear: a pattern of profiling and unnecessary force. He placed a printed report on the table, comparison of stop outcomes across units. The report showed Brent and Lynn's unit had the highest no-charge rate among 5 teams. Panel members exchanged glances. Mrs. Asai leaned forward. Officers, what steps will you take to prevent future harm? Brent inhaled, then exhaled slowly. His voice was tinged with defensiveness and fatigue. We followed protocol as trained. We'll review training guidelines and ensure body cam usage. Lynn nodded, voice shaky. We'll attend implicit bias workshops. Kenton inclined his head. Acknowledgement is a start. But I recommend procedural reforms, mandatory identity verification on every stop, real-time audit flags for missing footage, and quota-free patrol assignments to reduce demographic clustering. The panel scribbled notes. Captain Rolstad, seated at the back, tapped his pen anxiously. Then a surprise witness, Deputy Chief Alvarez, summoned by subpoena, took the stand. He conceded the department lacked clear guidelines for reasonable suspicion versus probable cause. He admitted officers often acted on instinct rather than objective criteria. His testimony undercut the notion that protocol alone governs stops. Brent's shoulders slumped. Lynn's eyes filled with tears. They sat side by side, listening as each piece of evidence reinforced the same conclusion. Their methods caused harm. Regardless of intent, Kenton closed his binder gently. This review is not about individual blame. It's about preventing recurrence. Officers' actions have real-world consequences, bruised bodies, shaken spirits, eroded trust. Accountability requires both acknowledgement and systemic change. Osai nodded gravely. The panel will deliberate. Findings will be delivered tomorrow. She rose, signaling the end of the hearing as attendees filed out. Brent and Lynn remained seated, stunned by the weight of the evidence. Around them, whispers filled the room. They'll be suspended. Retraining for sure. Will they face charges? Outside, fresh spring air greeted them. Lynn stepped onto the sidewalk, drawing a shaky breath. They made it sound like we were monsters, she whispered. Brent stood silently, eyes fixed on the door. His uniform felt heavy, like armor he no longer believed in. We weren't monsters, he said quietly. We just missed the bigger picture. Lynn nodded, wiping a tear. We've seen the patterns. We know now. He looked at her, then down at his badge. The metal glinted dully in the afternoon sun. What happens next won't be easy. I know, she replied. Her voice, though small, carried resolve. But maybe it's what we needed. As they parted ways, Brent to file a statement at the precinct, Lynn to meet with internal affairs investigators, the weight of responsibility settled on their shoulders. No longer mere officers responding to calls, they now carried the knowledge of systemic harm woven into their routines. Kenton Morrow's quiet dossier had exposed cracks they could no longer ignore. Tomorrow's verdict loomed like a storm on the horizon, but in that neutral conference room, they'd witnessed the power of data, testimony, and truth. And for the first time, they understood that policing was more than enforcing laws, it was protecting people. When the panel reconvened the next morning, Brent and Lynn would face consequences commensurate with the patterns they'd failed to see. Yet in that silence before the storm, both felt a cautious hope that accountability, though painful, could lead to genuine reform and, perhaps, redemption. Aftermath and reform. The morning sun filtered through the frosted windows of the neutral conference room as officers Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer returned for the review board's verdict. The long gray walls felt colder than before, each fold-out chair now holding eyes that waited for judgment. At the head of the table sat Special Counsel Kenton M. Morrow, his binder closed, expression calm. To his right sat Mrs. Asai and Mr. Granger from the Civil Accountability Office. To his left, two representatives from the State Attorney's Office. Captain Ralsted stood at the back, uniform crisp, face taut with anticipation. Silence settled as the board's presiding member, retired Judge Alicia Herrera, cleared her throat and tapped her gavel. This panel has reviewed the evidence, data patterns, body cam audits, civilian testimony, and departmental policies. We find that Officers Halcroft and Mercer engaged in repeated misapplication of discretionary stops and failures in procedural oversight. Accordingly, we render the following decisions. Her gaze shifted to Brent Halcroft. Officer Halcroft is suspended from active field duty indefinitely, pending completion of mandated retraining, psychological evaluation, and participation in an external equity audit. All cases flagged during this review will be reopened under independent supervision. Judge? Herrera then addressed Lynn Mercer. Officer Mercer is likewise suspended from active field duty indefinitely, subject to the same requirements for retraining, evaluation, and oversight. Any evidence of known compliance with these directives will result in further disciplinary action. Hey, Brent's jaw tightened, but he neither flinched nor protested. Lynn's knuckles whitened around her notebook, lips pressed so tightly her face seemed drawn. Neither spoke as the gavel echoed. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. The weight of accountability descended. Heavier than any conviction. Outside the municipal building, news vans lined the curb. A banner on one CN unbranded vehicle read, "Civil Accountability Wins." Bystanders craned their necks as Brent and Lynn emerged, shields no longer holding the shape of authority, but bearing the dents of scrutiny. The two officers walked side by side, uniform caps in hand, past microphones thrust into their faces. They offered no comments. Words would only deepen the wounds. Precinct press release arrived later that afternoon. Officers Halcroft and Mercer placed on administrative leave pending mandatory retraining and evaluation. The Boise Police Department remains committed to transparency and community trust. On social media, the announcement spurred heated debate, praise for reform, criticism of biased policing, discussions about the broader implications for law Enforcement. Back at the Boise precinct, a new poster appeared in the hallway near the squad room. Civil Accountability Hotline. Confidential reporting, complete with a phone number and QR code. Rookies paused longer than necessary, eyes flicking between the hotline and the empty spots in the roster. Veterans lowered their heads, murmuring about things changing and new rules. In the break room, the vending machine hummed. A different tune, the day's gossip no longer about shift rotations, but about data audits and oversight protocols. Captain Ralsted convened a precinct-wide briefing that evening. Officers crowded the room, uniforms neat, but tension palpable. The captain stood before a projection screen showing anonymized graphs, stop frequencies by unit, body cam upload compliance rates, demographic distributions. Spoke without preamble. We've been handed a clear message. Patterns of bias and procedural failures cannot stand. Training modules will be updated, accountability measures strengthened. And every officer will undergo implicit bias training and scenario-based de-escalation drills. He clicked the remote. A slide displayed a new policy. All stops require ID verification or documented justification. All body cam footage must be uploaded within 24 hours. Supervisors will review stop data weekly for anomalies. The room absorbed the changes in silence. Some officers nodded, others frowned. No one applauded. In the days that followed, Brent and Lynn attended training sessions at the Civil Accountability Office's community campus. They sat through lectures on procedural justice, data-driven policing, and the history of over-policing in marginalized communities. Role-play scenarios tested their ability to verify identities, communicate respectfully, and employ de-escalation techniques. Each exercise concluded with a facilitated discussion, where instructors highlighted moments of implicit bias and microaggressions that officers once overlooked. Brent, whose default mode had been decisive action, found himself questioning every assumption. Lynn, who prided herself on toughness, discovered ways to temper authority with empathy. Meanwhile, at Idaho State University's School of Criminal Justice, an equity audit team pored over precinct records going back a decade. Findings would inform statewide policy reforms. Kenton Morrow, though no longer in Boise, remained actively involved remotely, advising on training curriculums, and lobbying for legislative changes to enforce independent oversight in every jurisdiction. 2 months later, Brent and Lynn returned to the precinct, badges polished, uniforms crisp. They reported to the inspector's office, where a new memorandum awaited their signatures. Reinstatement conditional on completion of retraining, valuation, and passage of competency assessment in civil accountability. Both signed without hesitation, aware that their careers now hinged on public trust as much as conviction. At shift briefing the next morning, Brent addressed his team. He spoke cautiously but earnestly. "We've been through a lot. The changes aren't just policies on paper, they're about doing right by our community. We'll hold ourselves to higher standards." Mercer followed, adding, "Mistakes happened. But we're committed to learning and improving. Let's work together to restore trust." Officers exchanged tentative nods. Some offered words of encouragement, others remained stoic. The precinct felt different, less insular, more accountable, and undeniably more vigilant about bias. The transformation was neither swift nor seamless, but it was underway. Meanwhile, Kenton Morrow's work continued, presenting the Boise case as a model at national policing conferences, advising on the creation of oversight offices in other states, and compiling reports on systemic reform. He never sought the spotlight, preferring modest recognition and concrete outcomes over headlines and praise in Boise. The precinct's community outreach programs expanded. Officers partnered with neighborhood organizations for Coffee with a Cop events, now including facilitated dialogues on bias and procedure. Local churches and community centers hosted joint workshops, and restitution meetings offered private apologies to individuals wrongfully detained. For some, those gestures were small comfort. For many others, they signaled genuine movement toward accountability. On a crisp autumn morning, it's over a year after that first arrest outside Grange Bakehouse, a rookie officer paused at the civil accountability poster. She checked her journal. Have I ever made a mistake and learned from it? The question, once hypothetical, now felt personal. She scanned the hotline number, considered the implications, and resolved to uphold the standard set by her predecessors. No matter how daunting, Brent Halcroft walked past her, shoulders squared, badge gleaming with renewed purpose. Lynn Mercer trailed behind, her stride confident but measured. They had once been emblematic of unchecked authority. Now they embodied a new paradigm where responsibility, reflection, and reform define true policing. Lessons born from one man's quiet resolve had rippled outward, reshaping policies, retraining minds, and reminding every officer that power entrusted is power to be wielded with care. And in Boise, beneath the watchful murals of community murals and the hum of patrol cars, the echoes of Chapter 6 lived on, not as a final act, but as the beginning of a more accountable tomorrow.